Lena's heart raced as she looked between Verek and the others. The air felt thick with unspoken questions, and the silence was almost unbearable. Verek's sudden appearance in the forest was a twist they weren't prepared for, neither was Lena. How could he be here, standing in front of them, after everything that had happened? Why should we trust you? Cora spoke up, her voice sharp. Her suspicion was clear, and Lena could feel it in the air. Cora wasn't ready to forgive Verek, not yet. Verek's eyes darkened, and he met Cora's gaze without flinching. I'm not asking you to forgive me. But I need you to listen. What's coming is far worse than anything you've faced, and I can't stop it alone. Lena's thoughts spun, her head feeling dizzy. They had just faced one of the darkest creatures of the forest, and now they were being told there was something worse. Was this another trick, another twist in their story? Something worse? Ken asked, still clutching his side where the beast had slashed him. Blood soaked through his tunic, but the warrior wasn't about to show weakness. You've been gone for weeks, Verek. What exactly are we up against? Verek's face hardened as he gestured for them to follow him. I'll explain more once we're out of the forest. There are ears out here. And not all of them belong to creatures. The group exchanged wary glances but followed Verek deeper into the woods. Despite everything, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. Verek's return felt too convenient, too much like the answer to every question they hadn't asked yet. Verek led them off the main trail, weaving through the thick trees with practiced ease. Lena followed close behind, her mind racing. She was trying to reconcile the man she had once known, bold, impulsive, and unpredictable, with the figure before her. He seemed different. More guarded. But was that really a sign of change, or just another lie? After a few moments of quiet walking, Verek stopped, turning to face the group. He gestured toward the base of a massive oak tree. We are safe here. For now, he said. The group stopped, eyes scanning the surroundings. Something about the clearing felt wrong. The air was unnaturally still, like the whole forest was holding its breath. What's this place? Cora asked. A sanctuary, Verek replied simply. One of the last few untouched parts of the forest. I've been hiding here, watching, waiting. The curse, Lena, it's not just on you. It's on all of us. The words hit Lena like a physical blow. She had always assumed that the curse was hers to bear, that it had something to do with her powers or bloodline. But now, Verek was telling her that everyone was affected. What are you talking about? Lena demanded. How is it possible? The curse is tied to the land itself, Verek explained, his voice quiet, as if he were confessing something long buried. The forest, the creatures, the people, all of us are connected by it. And it's spreading. Faster than we thought. Verek moved toward a stone altar in the center of the clearing, brushing away leaves and dirt with his hands. Beneath it, a deep, pulsating energy hummed through the earth, like a heartbeat. This is the heart of it, Verek said, kneeling beside the altar. The source of the curse. Lena felt a chill run down her spine as she stepped closer. The energy in the air was palpable, like a storm waiting to break. But as much as she wanted to turn away from it, something inside her pulled her forward. What is this? She whispered, staring at the dark stone beneath Verek's hands. The land was cursed long ago, Verek said, his voice heavy with regret. But something has disturbed it. The balance is shifting, and we're all at risk. Cora stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. And what does this have to do with you, Verek? Verek sighed deeply, as if he were bracing for something. I didn't just disappear to escape you all. I was trying to find a way to stop this. But the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. The curse isn't just magic, or a spell. It's an infection. And we are all infected. Lena's mind reeled with the weight of his words. She had known something was wrong, but this was a nightmare far worse than she could have imagined. If we're infected, Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper, then what's the cure? Verek's face hardened. There is no cure. But there is a way to stop it from getting worse. A way to sever the connection between the curse and the land. But it requires a sacrifice. The word hung in the air, like a sword poised above them. Lena's mind whirled as she processed what Verek had said. A sacrifice. Was this what they were walking into? Another trap, another lie. What kind of sacrifice? Ken asked, his voice cautious. Verek looked at each of them in turn, his expression grim. The only way to sever the curse is to destroy the altar. But to do that, one of us has to bind ourselves to it. It's the only way to undo the damage the curse has caused. Lena's stomach twisted. Bind themselves to the altar. That was madness. No one is doing that, she said firmly, though doubt began to creep into her voice. We can find another way. Verek shook his head. There isn't time. The curse is already spreading, faster than we can control. If we don't act soon, we won't have a choice. Kara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. What does it take to bind yourself to the altar? Verek's eyes darkened. Blood. Life. A willing sacrifice. Lena's heart skipped a beat. The reality of what Verek was saying hit her all at once. There were no easy choices here. Someone had to step forward. And that person might not survive. The weight of the decision hung over them like a dark cloud. No one spoke for a long time. Everyone seemed to be processing what Verek had said, weighing their options. Finally, Ken broke the silence. I'll do it, he said, his voice steady. Lena turned to him, horrified. No, Ken, you can't. We'll find another way. But he shook his head, his eyes filled with a quiet resolve. There's no other way. You know that. I can't let this curse take all of us. I've lived through enough battles to know when to make the hard choice. Lena's chest tightened with emotion. She didn't want to lose him, not after everything they had been through. But he was right. The land was dying, and they had no other options. Are you sure? She asked, her voice trembling. Ken nodded. I'm sure. This is the only way. And so, with a heavy heart, they prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. The night air was thick with tension as the group stood before the altar, the stone glowing faintly beneath their feet. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. Lena's heart beat loudly in her chest, drowning out all other noise. Are you ready? Verek asked, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. Ken didn't reply immediately. He was staring at the altar, his expression unreadable. His hands were clenched at his sides, and Lena could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, despite his earlier resolve. Lena moved to stand beside him, reaching for his hand. We don't have to do this, she said, her voice thick with emotion. There's got to be another way. We'll find it. We'll find a way to break the curse without losing anyone, she thought, but the words stuck in her throat. Ken turned to face her, his blue eyes filled with the weight of the decision. This is the only way, Lena. I've known it since the moment we discovered the curse. I can feel it inside me. I'm the one who can end this. Lena's throat tightened, and she squeezed his hand, willing him to understand that she didn't want to lose him. Not now. Not when they had come so far. But Ken smiled softly, his face filled with a mix of sadness and acceptance. "This is my choice," he said quietly. "And I'm doing it for all of us. For you." Lena felt the sting of unshed tears as she looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Cora stood at the edge of the clearing, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes narrowed with doubt. She was clearly struggling with the decision, too, but there was no time to argue. No time to find another way. "The blood," Varric said, snapping everyone back to the present. "It needs to be yours, Ken. The sacrifice will bind you to the curse. You'll feel everything it does. But it's the only way to destroy the altar." Ken nodded grimly. He stepped forward to the altar and placed his hand upon the cold stone, the pulse of dark energy beneath it vibrating in his palm. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady despite the heaviness in the air. Varric moved to his side, and with a sharp motion, he drew a blade from his belt. The dark energy that had been swirling around the altar seemed to grow more intense, its power rising in the air like a storm ready to break. Before anyone could stop him, Ken took a deep breath and pressed the blade against his palm, cutting deeply. The blood dripped down onto the altar, and the ground seemed to shudder beneath their feet. The forest responded, the wind picking up, and the shadows in the trees seemed to grow darker, as if the very land was aware of the sacrifice. The altar pulsed with an eerie, violet light, and Lena felt the energy shift in the air. She watched in horror as the darkness began to crawl from the altar, spreading like a disease through the earth. "No," she whispered, horrified by what she was witnessing. Varric stepped back, his face pale, but there was a glimmer of something else in his eyes. Hope, perhaps. Or was it regret? Ken was silent, his face a mask of concentration as the blood seeped into the stone. His breath came in shallow gasps as he began to feel the weight of the curse. Lena could see the muscles in his jaw tighten, his eyes glazing over with a deep, unspoken pain. "This is it," Varric muttered. "The heart of the curse is weakening, but the bond with Ken is growing stronger. He'll have to endure it for as long as it takes." Lena turned to him, panic rising in her chest. "How long? How long will he have to endure this?" Varric met her gaze, his expression grim. "As long as it takes to sever the connection between the land and the curse. There's no telling how long it will take, or if it will work at all." Minutes passed, and the forest seemed to grow more alive with every heartbeat. The pulse of energy in the ground thrummed beneath their feet, and Lena could see the shift in the shadows around them. Something was happening, something that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Ken stood there, unmoving, his face contorted in pain. His eyes were glazed over, as if he were caught in a trance, and his hands shook violently as more blood seeped from the wound on his palm. Lena could feel it too, the dark energy coursing through the ground, the way the forest seemed to be awakening. It was as if the curse itself were fighting against Ken's sacrifice, pulling at him, trying to keep its hold on the land. "This isn't working," Cora said, her voice tight with worry. "We need to stop this." But Varric shook his head. "We can stop it now. If we do, the curse will only get stronger. We have to let it run its course." Lena's chest tightened as she looked at Ken. He was struggling now, his breath ragged and shallow. "Ken, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You have to hold on." Ken's eyes flickered as he seemed to hear her. He looked at her, his lips cracked in a faint smile, though it was tinged with pain. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice weak but steady. "I'll see this through. For you." But as the last words left his lips, the ground trembled beneath them with a force that nearly knocked them off their feet. The altar cracked, its stone splitting open, and a scream filled the air, a sound so deafening and full of rage that it shook the very trees. The curse was fighting back, but the altar was breaking apart. The bond that had held the land and the curse together was beginning to unravel. Lena's heart skipped a beat as she saw the cracks in the altar deepen, the stone breaking apart with an unnatural sound. The scream that had filled the air grew louder, and suddenly, a dark shadow erupted from the cracks. It was like a figure, humanoid in shape, but made entirely of shadow and smoke, its eyes burning with an otherworldly fury. "This is it," Varric said, his voice grim as he backed away from the altar. "We've unleashed the true form of the curse." Lena stepped back, her hand reaching for Ken's arm, but he was too far gone, the energy from the altar pulling him further into its grasp. The shadow rose higher, twisting in the air like a massive storm cloud, and Lena realized with a sickening jolt that the true battle was just beginning. But could they stop it? Would Ken survive this? The shadow, a mass of swirling darkness and rage, loomed over the altar, casting an unnatural pall over the clearing. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, a force so malevolent that the trees around them seemed to bow beneath its weight. Lena felt it, the chill that crawled up her spine, the oppressive sense that they were standing on the edge of something much larger than they could control. "Ken," she cried, her voice raw with panic. But he didn't respond. His body was trembling, his face pale as he continued to bleed, his connection to the curse growing deeper by the second. The shadow shifted, narrowing in on him like a predator sensing its prey. Lena's heart pounded as she realized they were running out of time. Varric, too, seemed paralyzed by the sight of the shadow. His usual confidence had faltered. He stepped back, eyes flickering with uncertainty. "This is beyond us," Varric muttered, almost to himself. "We can't fight it, not like this." Kara, ever the strategist, was already moving. "We need to sever the connection between Ken and the curse. He can't endure much longer." Lena turned to Kara, desperation in her eyes. "But how?" "There's no time. The shadow, it's going to." Before she could finish, the shadow surged toward them, its form expanding, tendrils reaching for the group. A blast of wind and darkness exploded from the altar, knocking everyone to the ground. Ken let out a guttural cry, his body arching against the invisible force pulling at him. The bond between him and the curse was so strong now that Lena could see it in his eyes, the struggle, the pain. He was being torn apart, and there was nothing she could do. "Ken," she screamed again, her voice hoarse. But there was no reply. The shadow's tendrils coiled around him like serpents, and Lena felt the heat of his pain deep in her soul. Kara and Varric were scrambling to their feet, their eyes wide with terror. "This is the end," Varric said, his voice shaking. "We need to destroy the altar. Now." Lena nodded, her hands shaking as she fought the urge to run to Ken. She had to be strong. They had to end this, before it consumed everything. Kara pulled a small dagger from her belt, its blade glowing with a faint light. "This should break the connection," she said, though there was doubt in her eyes. "But we'll need to act quickly." Without waiting for anyone's approval, she rushed toward the altar. Lena followed closely behind, her eyes never leaving Ken, even as the shadow closed in around him, its darkness thickening. Kara plunged the dagger into the heart of the altar, and for a moment, nothing happened. The shadow only grew stronger, feeding off the energy from the altar, but Kara didn't stop. She twisted the blade, and suddenly the ground beneath them trembled violently. "Keep going," Varric shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of shrieking wind and crashing energy. Lena grabbed Ken's hand, pulling with every ounce of strength she had left. But the shadow was stronger, and the dark tendrils began to pull him away, dragging him further into the depths of the curse. "No!" Lena cried, feeling the bond between them snap painfully in her chest. "Not like this." Kara's voice cut through the chaos, desperate and commanding. "We have to reverse the ritual. The curse is bound to Ken's blood. If we don't sever the bond, he's lost. Ken's face was barely visible now, his body engulfed in shadows. He was fading, his form barely hanging on. The dagger was buried deep, but it was not enough. Lena felt herself slipping into despair, but she refused to let go. Everything felt like it was spinning out of control. The wind howled louder, and the shadow's form began to take shape, its eyes glowing like twin infernos, its body a mass of shifting smoke. Ken's voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough to break through the storm. "Lena," he gasped, his voice choked with pain. "Lena, I'm sorry. I don't think I can." Lena squeezed his hand, her heart breaking. "Don't you dare say that. You're not alone." She looked toward Cora, who was still fighting with the dagger, her face twisted with concentration. The altar had cracked open completely, and the shadow was beginning to solidify into a grotesque figure, a manifestation of all the pain, rage, and torment that had haunted the land for centuries. "This isn't just about Ken anymore," Cora shouted over the wind. "This curse is a reflection of everything that has gone wrong here. It's the land's pain, the people's suffering. We have to confront it directly, not just try to fight it." Varek stepped forward, his face grim. "Cora's right. The shadow feeds on the land's darkness. We need to bring light back to this place." Lena looked at the clearing, her eyes darting between Ken, the altar, and the gathering storm. They needed something powerful enough to push back the curse's grasp and destroy the shadow once and for all. Without thinking, Lena raised her hands to the sky, calling out to the very land that had been poisoned by the curse. She felt the power rising within her, the connection to the earth, a force as old as the world itself. It surged through her veins, filling her with a brilliant light. "Ken," she whispered, tears falling freely. "Hold on. We're going to make it. Together." In that moment, a burst of light exploded from her hands, slashing through the shadow, forcing it back. The land trembled, the forest groaning as the energy of the earth began to fight the curse's hold. The shadow screamed as it was pushed away, and Lena felt the overwhelming weight of the curse start to lift. But the cost was high. Ken fell to his knees, gasping for breath, his blood still staining the altar. The shadow had been driven back, but the bond between him and the curse had taken its toll. Lena rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she tried to catch him. "No," she whispered. "You're going to be okay. You have to be okay." But Ken didn't respond. His eyes were unfocused, and life seemed to be draining from him. "We have to get him away from the altar," Varek said urgently, kneeling beside them. "We need to take him back." Cora stepped forward, her face pale. "The curse is broken, but the ritual isn't complete. He's tied to the altar, to the land's blood. It's not enough just to push the shadow back. We need to free him, fully." Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she felt the weight of their situation press down on her. But she wasn't giving up. Not now. Not when they had come this far. "Together," she said, standing and locking eyes with each of them. "We can finish this. Together." Lena held Ken in her arms, her heart pounding with a frantic urgency. The light from the altar was dimming, flickering as though the last remnants of the curse were still fighting to cling to him. His breathing was shallow, his body cold, and the blood that stained his skin seemed to be fading into the earth beneath him. "We have to finish this," Lena whispered through gritted teeth, her voice raw with desperation. Her hands trembled as she tried to steady his body, but the more she tried, the more he seemed to slip away. Varek was kneeling next to them, his face grim. "The land has released its hold, but Ken is still bound to it. If we don't sever the connection completely, he's lost." Cora stepped forward, her eyes narrowed in concentration. She was holding the dagger, the same one they had used to breach the altar's power. The blade was now glowing a bright, ethereal blue, as if responding to the energy in the air. "It's not just about breaking the curse," Cora said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We need to give him a new path. A new bond. He has to choose to let go of the land's blood and the curse that ties him to it." Lena's eyes met Cora's. "What does that mean?" Cora glanced at her with a look of sorrow. "It means we need to give him the chance to make the final choice, to choose the life he wants." A cold chill ran down Lena's spine as the weight of Cora's words sank in. This wasn't just about fighting shadows and breaking curses anymore. This was about Ken making a sacrifice, not for them, but for himself. Ken stirred, his eyes flickering open for a brief moment. His voice was weak, barely a rasp. "Lena. I'm here," she said urgently, her fingers brushing his hair from his forehead. "You have to fight this. We're almost there. You have to hold on." But Ken didn't respond right away. His gaze drifted to Cora, and then to the glowing dagger in her hand. "I don't have much time, do I?" he murmured, his voice filled with a quiet understanding. "The land's grip is too strong. I can feel it pulling me back." "Ken, no." Lena pleaded, shaking his shoulder. "We can finish this. You just have to make a choice." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was a spark of recognition, a glimpse of the man she had come to love. But then his gaze darkened, filled with the weight of his past, of the bloodshed he had witnessed, and the mistakes he had made. "I can't escape it," he said quietly. "It's part of me. It always has been." Cora's voice was firm, cutting through the despair. "That's not true. The land's blood doesn't define you. You have the power to choose what comes next. But you have to choose." Lena leaned in closer. "Please. Choose us. Choose life." Ken closed his eyes, as if weighing the impossible choice before him. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke the words that would change everything. "I choose freedom." With that, the dagger was thrust into the earth, and an immense pulse of energy erupted from the altar. The connection between Ken and the land was severed, the final tether to the curse snapping like a chain breaking. A wave of light washed over them all, pushing back the darkness. For a moment, everything was silent. The world held its breath. Then, the earth beneath them cracked, the land itself groaning in agony as it let go of its last remnants of darkness. The shadow, the curse, disintegrated into nothingness, vanishing into the wind. Lena felt her heart beat in time with the tremors that shook the earth, a sense of release sweeping over her like a cleansing tide. And then, there was Ken, no longer bound by the curse, no longer fading into the shadows. He was free. His body was still, but the weight that had pressed upon him was gone. The blood that had stained him was no longer there, and the dark aura that had surrounded him vanished like smoke in the wind. Slowly, his chest rose and fell, and Lena let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Ken," she whispered, her voice trembling. His eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they were clear, no longer clouded by the curse or the darkness of the land. He blinked up at her, his lips curving into a weak but genuine smile. "I'm free," he said softly. "Thank you." The sun broke through the thick clouds, casting its golden rays across the land. The storm had passed, and the world was quiet again, calm, peaceful, as if the earth itself had been reborn. Lena stood beside Ken, her heart still racing with the intensity of what they had just faced. She had feared losing him, feared that the curse would take him forever. But now, standing in the light of the new dawn, she realized that they had won. They had all made it through, together. Varric and Kara were nearby, watching them with expressions of cautious relief. There was no celebration, no triumph. Only a deep sense of exhaustion and the quiet understanding that the battle was over. "Where do we go from here?" Kara asked, breaking the silence. Lena turned to look at Ken, her heart full of hope. "We move forward. We build something new. For all of us." Ken looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Together," he agreed. As they walked away from the altar, the world around them seemed to come alive again, the forest breathing once more. The curse was gone, the shadow had been vanquished, and the land, along with the people, was free. For the first time in a long while, the future felt bright. The shadow was gone, the curse lifted, and Ken was freed. But now, a new journey begins, one that will forge their future, and the future of the land. What comes next is uncertain, but they are no longer bound by the past. Together, they will walk toward the light. Ken faces Lena and said to her he remembered his promise to take her back to her homeland. He told the others he would meet with them much later and that he needs to get Lima back to her abode. Ken took Lena to the sea where she was captured in a pot by his father. She entered the sea and became a mermaid again. He was so sad they had to say hard goodbyes with tears rolling down his eyes.